The classic Sega Master System 8-bit console is home to, quite simply, some of the greatest games of the 80s generation. While Nintendo's console pretty much did steal the limelight during that generation, but make no mistake, the Master System was equally the best alternative in terms of what it presented. Even with the interesting amount of games that all presented different aspects for players to enjoy and experience. So much in a way that years later, Sega would develop also the Game Gear, bringing a lot of the classic Master System games to the handheld format, while also producing even more games for players to experience that we couldn't get on Sega's popular 8-bit console. But if you were lucky enough to own the two, you had great opportunities to experience some very interesting games. And even over the years, while the consoles no longer are in development, but there are fans that are creating a multitude of different fan-made experiences and homebrews to keep the console experience alive, and they're doing a really good job being able to utilise the original hardware to create some very interesting and unique ideas, even pushing the limits of what the original hardware could do to some degree. But for those of us that grew up with the Master System, me included, as it was the first console I ever played and yet owned, it always holds a special place, and it's always very cool to go back and play a lot of the titles that I would have had and owned growing up, but even to experience other games that I never got the chance to witness back then, as there was always games that you would find in your local storefront that you were interested in but obviously couldn't afford to buy. And then later with the Mega Drive, when it came out, games for the Master System started to appear less and less. So you were lucky if you were able to find any sort of games being made available, so the chances are you would snap them up if you could get them for a good price. But in all honesty, there were a lot of very cool games on the Master System, even with the Game Gear, that showcased many distinctive and interesting experiences, from racing to fighting, even beat 'em ups and sports, that definitely left a lasting impact on us as players. Even more so when we went to play different computer games on various other later consoles from Sega, because you'd be familiar with distinctive or familiar brands, and it was always interesting to see the level of progression or the changes in terms of how the games would look, play and feel. And with modern times, like I say, games are being made by fans with homebrews and so forth, but a lot of people still go through the aspect of wanting to collect for these original systems. While it's still doable, the landscape of retro games is becoming quite expensive for many, and not all of us have the time or resources or even space to house a lot of these games, myself included. But we still have emulation. While yes, it's not for everybody, and there's a lot of people that are totally against it, and look, each to their own. But if you've no room to house or to store a lot of games, or you don't even have the money to buy them, well, what's the alternative? There really isn't any apart from emulation. And at least with emulation, and if you know where to find the games, now I can't say well, but you'll be able to find them if you look hard enough. You'll be able to revisit a lot of those old classics, and they're still as much fun to play now as ever. I still go back to play a lot of these games every so often, and I have done even with previous videos which I've covered on the channel. I'll leave links to some of them down in the description. And in many ways, a lot of them are still just as much fun to play as ever. While yes, there are some questionable titles, but that's the same with any console, but there are those hidden gems out there that are definitely worth your time. So it was interesting when I stumbled across this particular collection here that showcases a multitude of different games from both the Master System and yet even the Game Gear. But what's funny about it is that the game, yes, can play on an emulator, but it doesn't just play on any emulator. You actually need to use the PCSX2 PlayStation 2 emulator for it to work, which is quite unusual to say the least. But at the same time, if you've already got access to that format on your system, this is just another way to experience a lot of classic games. And if anything, the one cool thing about this particular collection is that it does have most of everything all in the one place. So you don't have to go and try to keep gathering files from other resources. You literally need to just download one file, download the emulator, and away you go, because you can utilize all of the internal features within the emulator itself to combine all of the controller specifics to make it more usable for your own play styles and preferences. So it's well worth looking into. But what you really do have here is a collection of all the very popular games from those systems. Anything from the classic Sonic the Hedgehog games, from Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 2, Sonic Chaos, even with the Streets of Rage games, the Wonder Boy games, even predominantly with one of the best games pretty much ever made with Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. You have Alex Kidd in Miracle World. There is even access to some additional homebrews of Alex Kidd games and even other sequels that never made their way to the console but were created by fans. Plus you have all of the rare, unusual and quirky games that very few of us ever knew about or only seen in magazines or articles that you can gain access to here as well, along with the many renditions and even copies that would also see a way to the handheld Game Gear console, while also including many games from that system in particular. So there's definitely a lot of interesting titles to be had here, and the fact is that you can play them all in the one place place will appeal to fans of these consoles in particular, but will also present an air of simplicity to make it easier to access these games if you know how to use the emulator itself. But the cool thing about emulation, in fairness, is the fact is that fans can get together and create these compilations. They don't necessarily have to be for the system that the emulator is originally intended for, but you can be as creative as you want. But if you look at even the history of the PlayStation 2 in particular, especially in Japan, many games from Sega's back catalogue would be released as part of the Sega Ages 2500 series, which would prove to be a popular addition to the PlayStation 2's lineup within that region, with some of the games and collections also making their way into other regions later on during the console's lifespan. So it really is of no surprise to see fans come together to create these particular type of compilations to play on the emulators as well, which I think they would have been a really good addition had they been released in their full form on the console when it was live and well. But still, we can play them now, and that's what matters. But yeah, you pretty much have everything here, from racing games, fighting, arcade, RPG, beat 'em ups, platformers, and everything in between on both 8-bit systems. So there's definitely plenty to be had here. Plus you will find some hidden gems and rare games that you probably have never heard of, because there are also some games in here that are included that were also part of the likes of the Japanese version of the Master System, which would have been the Sega Mark III. So that will also give you some additional qualities and present some additional experiences to play some very, very rare and unheard of games, which is very cool indeed. And considering, as of recording this video, the Master System is approaching its 40th birthday, which is incredible to think that this console has been around for as long as it has. But it did also help to pave the way for a lot of other games and systems to come after it, and would prove to be a talking point for quite some time. And if you grew up during that generation, if you even played the likes of the Mega Drive, and even with later systems with the Saturn and Dreamcast, but want to know more of Sega's earlier history, this collection might be worth a look to see the amount of games that were released on these earlier 8-bit systems. You never know, you might find some interesting titles here that you might enjoy, and they are definitely worth a look, make no mistake about that. But it is very cool to see this compilation in all its glory, and there are quite a number of other collections out there from other systems from Sega that are worth also having a look, that also allow you to explore the vast catalogue and history of all of those other interesting consoles, which we can learn about here in this next video, so it might be worth checking out.